I'm really excited to be here. I am such a cheerleader when it comes to LibreTexts and the whole idea of open educational resources. The title of our presentation this afternoon or evening or morning, wherever in the world you happen to be at the moment, it's the magazine cover story. LibreTexts engages students' interests and insights through snippets and snapshots. You can tell I really like alliteration. My name is Dr. Armeda Reitzel, and I've been teaching an awful long time. In fact, I just did the math. I've been teaching now at the university level as a professor for 45 years. I'm ending my 45th year this spring. And I've actually been teaching for nearly a full decade online, so way before COVID started. So I'm a real firm believer from the get-go that it's important to have student voice. And we'll be sharing that throughout because I'm not going to do some of the talking. My students will be doing some of the talking because they're the important voices here. As I said, my name's Dr. Armeda Reitzel. And the reason I'm interested in LibreTexts and the whole open educational resource opportunities is because I went through graduate school. Actually, I graduated from high school, undergrad, and graduate school way back when, historically, in the 1970s. And if you've read about the 1970s in your history books, you know that definitely predated the internet. The way that you found materials, well, you had to go to the library and do something called going through the card catalog, or you read that got these big volumes off the table there that were there at the library, and they were called the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature. We didn't have the resources that are available now. And the only way that you could get a book at that point in time was back in the days, I don't recall being able to rent a book. I had to either buy the book new, which was exorbitant, or buy the book used, which you always hope that would be the case at the bookstore. On occasion, a professor might put a book on reserve, a hard copy book, at the library. So it was very challenging. I was first generation college, didn't come from a lot of money. I went to school based on scholarships, graduate assistantships, and graduate fellowships. I had to really have resources coming in to help me go to college. It's so wonderful now that there are so many opportunities out there for us as professors, as instructors, to share information with our students, but even more so, our students to be able to teach us as well. So that's kind of where I'm coming from during this presentation. And I'm going to let my students introduce themselves. Julia, would you introduce yourself to our folks here?
Yes, of course. So I'm Julia Kurtz. I am a third year here at Cal Poly Humboldt, and I am a communication major. I got into this major because I kind of been following my dad's footsteps, but I love communicating with people, and I think that being able to share information is really important, and that's kind of exactly what we're talking about, is open education. Sharing information is very important. It's the way we connect as people.
And Josué, could you introduce who you are?
Of course. My name is Josué Valdez. I am also a communications major. This is my senior year. I got into communications because at first I started in English, and that is very narrowly tailored. And as I was progressing through English literature, I was realizing that I was really drawn to rhetoric and messaging, and that is a huge component of communications. And I'm pretty happy to be here.
Okay. And so both of these students, both Julia and Josué, took a class for me last spring, and they're actually in another class of mine. They're skipping class right now to help me do this presentation. But since the professor's here, I guess that's okay. But they're also participating in a very similar activity this semester with a few nuances to it. So I was really happy when they agreed that they would help present, be my co-presenters for this presentation. So during this presentation, we're going to discuss the use of an open educational resource as the starting point, the real foundation for open pedagogy, where the students are the authors and the teachers. And I think that's important to state again, where the students really are the authors and the teachers. but they're using a LibreText as the foundation for their knowledge. And I asked Julia and Josué to think about this ahead of time a little bit. And Julia, if you were to describe what an open educational resource is to someone, let's say another student, how would you define what that is for them?
I would define open educational resources to other students as a resource used for class that is easily accessible, usually for either a low cost or no cost, that we can access readily and consistently for uses of our learning.
I like what you had to say there, that it's easy to access, it's affordable because hopefully it is a free resource, but it's available. I know one thing that I really like about LibreText is that I'm able to put it into our Canvas course. And so it's really nice to be able to have each chapter as you need them in the module that you need them for. So from an instructor standpoint, it's great. I'm glad to hear that's good for the student. And Josué, if you were going to, let's say you're talking to a professor who doesn't really know what an open educational resource is or has used one, what might you say to them?
I would say that an open educational resource is incredibly valuable, and it is a tool that can deconstruct boundaries to education. Essentially, because I mean, for me, I have spent hundreds of dollars on textbooks. I have to bring up that English literature again, because I know the big book in my last class that I took for that major cost $200. And that is a lot of money. And one of the great things about being in Professor Reitzel's class was that resource. It was, I mean, every time I sign up for a class, I essentially start dreading the financial burden of having to buy a textbook. And if I'm gonna like explain that to a professor, I don't know. I think that they would appreciate that sort of, I guess, ease of access for students.
Definitely. You said some really important things there. I really liked the phrase that you used, to deconstruct boundaries. Oh, I wrote that down, in fact, Josué. I like that. And I think it is really important for students to share out, if they're comfortable, with their professors, that they really want to have a quality education. I know you are all interested in that. You wouldn't be in college or university if you weren't. But there is a cost factor that's there. Let's be realistic. If you're taking a number of classes and they're all a couple of hundred, yeah, my daughter was a science major. Way back when, it was even more than that for her science classes. It is really important to have that access. So accessibility, both of you mentioned that, and I totally agree with both of you. So I wanted to focus in on what my learning outcomes as a professor happened to be for my students. And both of the students now have been in a few of my classes, and the outcomes for me are pretty much similar across the board, no matter what class it is. But I'm going to talk specifically about the class where we did the magazine activity. So the learning outcomes that I had as a professor for my students included that the students read the concepts and the examples that were in the LibreTexts Open Educational Resource. And the class that I'm specifically talking about is an interpersonal communication class that I taught in the spring semester of 2023. And it was actually a project that was done through the community college system. And I was one of the co-authors of some of the articles or some of the chapters of that particular book. And right now I'm actually the lead for a team that is developing ancillaries to go along with that textbook. In fact, we just submitted everything last month. So hopefully that'll be out with the book in the near future to help newer instructors know how to use the textbook. But for the students, it was to really get into the text as a foundation, to read the concepts. Next was to take a particular concept, a model, a theory, an idea from the book that really was significant to who? To them. They chose, each student chose concepts that was important to them for whatever reason. And I think that's really important. Rather than the professor always saying, well, this is what's important, we really need to think about from our student perspective, what's going to connect with them. And third, I wanted students to have an opportunity to reflect on that concept, to spend do a deep dive, spend a little time with that concept. mull it over in their heads, make things messy, mess it up a little bit. And from that, apply that concept then. Take it to a new idea, maybe an experience that they've had or a new experience. Do something a little bit different. So again, they're grappling, they're messing around with that concept. And then finally, I'd actually put this in bold and make it even bigger. Teach that concept, teach that idea to someone else. I think that is where learning comes into play. I learn through my teaching. I've been a lifelong learner because I've been a lifelong teacher. And I think that if we turn this model around where our learners are the teachers, it benefits not only ourselves as professors, it really is beneficial to the student themselves. So those are the learning outcomes that I have, but especially for this particular activity that we're going to be sharing with you. So this led to the creation of a student-driven project, the Interpersonal Communication e-zine. And e-zine stands for electronic magazine. And what's interesting is back in the dark ages, back in the 90s, 2000s, and early 2010s, I actually had my students creating old-fashioned scrapbooks. Anybody remember the old-fashioned scrapbook? You'd go down to a store, you'd buy this big scrapbook, you put pictures in and do all these cool things. I actually was using a scrapbook idea. It was a hard copy thing way back when, but it was based on lectures and readings that I had my students do. And so in a way, that was the precursor to the whole idea of an electronic magazine. I just updated it to bring in the internet. And so that's why when naming this particular presentation, we went with snippets and snapshots, kind of going back a little bit to the old-fashioned scrapbook, moving into the e-zine. What I had students do is write snippets, short articles that were reader-friendly. What do I mean by reader-friendly? They were based on academic reading. However, the focus of their writing was to a general public. So it would be like you go to a doctor's office, you know, all those old magazines that are there that are 5, 6, 7 years old that are sitting there in the doctor's office in the waiting room. And you kind of thumb through it while you're waiting for the doctor to bring you in for your appointment. I wanted students to take ideas and translate them into a way of saying something, a way of sharing that could be used by anybody who wasn't taking the class. So that was the idea. To me, that would show they could take an academic concept and translate it. And then with snapshots, well, I don't know about you, but I sure like visual learning. And the images invite readers to picture, to envision what the author is sharing. So in this assignment, like I did with the old-fashioned scrapbook and now with the electronic magazine, students wrote short articles on concepts and included images with them to get their point across. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I will be sharing this PowerPoint also with LibreTexts. And if you'd like a copy of it directly, I'm more than happy to send it to you. My email address is at the end of the slides here. But open pedagogy is where students engage as creators of information, not just consumers. I think that is so important. I think that we as professors, especially since we have the opportunity to use open educational resources, it's an opportunity for students to create their own open educational resources along the way. And please notice, this is a great resource that I actually found in LibreTexts. So the source is there if you'd like to look it up later. I encourage you to do so. It's a valuable source to explain what open education is. And open education often does, as I said, result in the creation of an open educational resource. And what I'm really hoping, and I think Kyle might be at this meeting, is to actually get some of the students' magazines published, because I think they have a lot of valuable information. So this would be an opportunity for the students to become the authors of open educational resources themselves. And here, for your information later on, here's 2 helpful LibreSource resources that talk about OER, the what and the why, and another one that talks about student engagement. And I'm not going to click on this link, but the second one, student engagement, it leads to a really, really great video. And I really like this video. And because of time, I'm not going to show you this video. It is only a couple of minute video. but it talks about the whole idea that, I like this term architects, that students become the architects of their own learning, engaging in project management and collaboration. That's the seventh and final thing that happens. You'll have to watch the video to find out what the other first six are. But what I did is, if we have time at the end of the presentation today, I actually put this slide at the end. We could watch it together. But I wanted to share this as a resource. And hopefully it won't start up. There we go. So, make a long story short, what did I do? Well, I always believe that it's important to give students a template. And Julie and Josué, did it help you that I kind of showed you what I did along the way, just as a sample to get you started? Is that helpful at all?
It was very helpful. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Julia, did you want to?
It was a great starting point to have, because I also went on Canva and ended up using mostly that to build my e-zine. So it was a great jumping block.
Yeah, and I find that sometimes it's really helpful to have that as a template, but I as a professor, so Julie and Josué, don't listen to this part because I'm going to be teaching you this after spring break, but I don't want to give too much of an example where students feel like they have to do it a particular way. But what I wanted to share with the students is how I use Canva, that's C-A-N-V-A, no S at the end. Canva is a wonderful platform. If you're not familiar with it, please, 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 immediately after the last session today, run out and start playing with it tonight. I went to magazine templates because I wanted my students to begin developing a cover for a magazine template. And I found this one pretty basic. I wanted a very simple one that I could start with. Okay, so this was my template for what we did in the interpersonal communication class. Okay, I want to get you ready for this because this is what I ended up creating. This is what I created from that template, believe it or not. I'll be honest, I really like visual rhetoric. I had so much fun doing this. And when I needed a break, I decided to do this. So I called it Communication Climate Magazine. I went to Pixabay. I got an open source a visual that I could use. I put that on there, and I do tell students to be sure that copyright infringement, you've got to know all this stuff, so my students learn about all that. And then because I had co-authored the article or the chapter in the LibreTexts on communication climate, I decided to call my magazine Communication Climate and focus in on that. And so we've got the different topics that are there. I did something on healthcare situations, high and low context. Oh, and this was so cool. And I think, Josué, you may have been one of the reasons for this, but we talked about food in my class. I think it's because of the time of day I was teaching the class. But the recipe for success, the feedback sandwich, we started talking about recipes. And so that was an option students could include. The whole idea of interpersonal communication and how it's passed down from generation to generation, based on food and eating around food and holiday foods and that kind of thing. And I won't go through all of this, but you can see that again, taking credit here, this is a publication by Dr. Armeda Reitzel, promoting positive interpersonal communication. But students could do whatever they want, take a template and change it into what they wanted to do for their magazine. And I have to tell you, Julie and Josué, the folks in your class, including the two of you, went so much above and beyond my expectations. I'm serious. I had some very basic, very easy to follow directions, pretty simple because I didn't want to overwhelm students. But oh, Julia and Josué, you went above and beyond the call of duty. You really did. The other thing I wanted students to do was to actually do a table of contents. They were supposed to end up with 6 articles. Now, some students did a heck of a lot more than just 6 articles, but the minimum was 6 articles based on 2 chapters from the LibreText. That way, there was a focus for the students. But at the same time, I was able to see them dealing with the material to be able to reach out to their readers about the material. So this semester in intercultural communication, so Julia and Josué, you get the preview of this ahead of time. I went to this magazine. My students in my intercultural communication class are using a different LibreText. And what we're doing in there is they're going to be working in small groups and create a group electronic magazine. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to create a new one. This is the magazine cover that I used. I did this about a week and a half ago because I'm going to present this to the students after spring break. This is the magazine cover. And this is what I developed as an example. So I'm calling it simply for spring semester 2024, the Intercultural Communication Magazine, special LibreTexts edition there. And the cover story, well, obviously it has to be this presentation. LibreTexts engages students' interest and insights through snippets and snapshots. And I've already shared the roller coaster of culture shock with my students and the slinky metaphor that I developed for cultural adaptation. So I included that on here. Again, the images, I got them from sources that are available where they're not copyrighted. And again, students will be using this as a template for that class. Now, however, I've been doing so much talking. I think it's time for Josué. I think it's time for you to share a little bit about what you did in the class.
All right. Well, this is the cover of my magazine for our interpersonal communication e-zine. And this was very interesting for me because it allowed me to apply some of the principles I learned in graphic design and just use them for this class. And I was also a little curious about Canva. I mean, Professor Reitzel exposed us to it, so I figured it might cut some of the work because it's a lot of work that goes into creating a layout. And I learned this in my graphic design class. I mean, I could spend a week just creating something like this, and I did actually spend a couple days just putting together all these visual elements and, you know, moving them around, figuring where they would go. I called my project Communication Breakdown because I thought it was kind of a funny little phrase, and also it's very descriptive of the material that's inside the magazine. And there are all the elements that you would have on the kind of magazine that you would see, I guess, like at the grocery store. We have the date, we have a little barcode. The only thing that's a little off is, you know, I have my name on there. But I was proud of the work. So if we could move to the next slide. We were talking about the communicative elements of food, and I kind of leaned into that for a lot of my work. And one of my resources in helping me design these layouts was actually Bon Appetit, the magazine. And I was just examining how they would block text and how they would distribute images. And it was very interesting to me. So I used a lot of that kind of research, I guess, to create these layouts. And I was also spending time looking for articles that explicitly linked communication and food. And I realized it's kind of it's not as broad of a field of research as it could be. I did find one very interesting article that was an explicit analysis of historical, I guess, rhetorical elements of food and culture. And then the next article I found I thought would be very fascinating for college students particularly, and I was really considering the audience I would have for this magazine. And I know that college students might be exposed to alcohol, and I wanted to break down how messaging behind ad campaigns for beer might work. And that was the topic of my next article. If we could move to the next slide. And this is where I discovered how hard it is to make a visually appealing image. I understand now that food photography is a real skill, and they're probably not using iPhones to shoot. But this was also a very fascinating and kind of, I guess, mind expanding, I want to say, approach to, I guess, connecting communication and food particularly. I wanted to talk about how my family used food to come together. And I did that through developing this recipe. I guess I worked on so many batches of guac that week just to put this together, because the way I was taught to make it was you eyeball everything. and you kind of, you know, you taste. So making this was a lot of work on my end, and then taking the pictures. When I finally settled on a recipe that I liked after spending probably a little too much money on avocados and limes and cilantro and garlic, um, I had,
I know I was going to ask you about the cost of this. Anyway, go ahead.
I mean, it wasn't as expensive as a textbook. I'll say that much.
Good.
But yeah, I think the foresight should have been finding one of the more visually appealing avocados to take a picture of. I was not thinking about that when I made this magazine, but I'm actually very proud of the honesty in these images, if I'm going to be honest. So if we could move on to the next slide. So this is an element that is explicitly in the OER for the interpersonal communication class. We're talking about the Johari window. And looking through the templates on Canva is what kind of inspired me for this. I really liked the clean, I guess, division of the images and the blocks of text. And I obviously kind of messed around with it. I learned how fonts work kind of in graphic design. So there was a lot of experimentation in the way I put this together. But this concept particularly spoke to me because one of the things I'm kind of fascinated by is that disclosure works in communication. And the Johari window is about self-disclosure. And I think at that point in my own personal life, I was having a lot of interesting revelations about about disclosure. This was a very, I think it was an important element of the class, and it was also a very personally fulfilling aspect of the project. If we could move to the next slide. So I don't know. I just want to talk about the Johari window for a moment. It's a framework, and it divides the self into four distinct, I guess, let's call them panes on a window. And the first one is the open self, and this is me talking to you right now. This is everything that I will disclose to anyone at any given point in time. There is a closed self, which is known only to me. And, there's a little bit of room between the open and closed self and disclosure. It's kind of fascinating. It shrinks with people, the closed self, and it opens up. It's on a spectrum. We have the unknown self, which is something that I guess well, if we could move to the next slide, I'm sorry.
There you go.
Yeah. There we go. Sorry. The unknown self is entirely hidden. And I think when I was reading this, I was explicitly linking it to trauma, but after doing some more reading, because I went over some of the materials I went to compose this whole article, I realized that it's not that cut and dry. It's pretty interesting. There are things that get lost to your memory that you just forget because you grow old, or maybe it wasn't that important. The unknown self is really fascinating. And the blind self is something that pretty much anyone else can see that I can't. So I'm actually incredibly aware of most of my tics, but there's some things that might be really common in my communication patterns that I just am completely unconscious of. And I think this was really fascinating and also helped me in my relationships. communication, it works in a lot of fascinating ways. And this was, like I said, a very important and a relevant topic for me. And it's a little bit different than what I would normally be fascinated with, because I'm really into semiotics and messaging and how people interpret things. Um, Kind of driving that inward was fascinating for me, and something I never really considered up until this point. I took interpersonal communication just because it was a bit of an off, just not something that I associate with communication. Um, and yeah, that covers my I guess magazine portion.
I appreciate you sharing out, Josué, and it's very clear to me, at least, how messing around with this and getting in and delving deeper into something that probably you normally wouldn't delve into in the way that you did. And having that opportunity was really, really eye-opening for you and a really good process to go through. And I appreciate you sharing that. And Julia, why don't you share a little bit about what you did?
Yeah, so this one is my e-zine, and I focused on like listening and emotions was really what I focused on my magazine. I wanted to make it look comforting and calming, and I wanted it to not be too overwhelming while still being very aesthetically pleasing. So I tried to keep my magazine wraps a little bit. But I really enjoyed making this magazine because I got to focus on what I thought was really important. And I loved this class, this interpersonal communication class, because I was always applying what I was learning to my daily life. And moving into this magazine, I was able to pick out the aspects of the class that I got to utilize most and put them in this e-zine and show kind of how much I grew from that. So next slide, please. The first article that I was going to talk about is my empathetic listening article. This one was based off of an assignment that we did previously in the class in the semester, which we went through the chapters and we picked out specifics that interest us and that had resonated with us. And I loved using this assignment to connect the text to my daily life. And it's kind of, I almost think of it as a scrapbook in of itself, because every single one of my assignments was just like, I put this in my life today, or I did this with my friends recently. So next slide, please. This is just a little bit more detail, what I thought was kind of the most important from this article about how empathetic listening was not something, I didn't know what it was called when I first read through LibreText online, but it was really great to be able to have this and know how to put a name to this thing that I'd already been doing most of my life. And the next one was focusing on mindfulness and when you're communicating with other people, how to keep the space that you're communicating in to be focused on each other opposed to the outside distractions that you could have, and how being mindful about that and keep yourself in the present with the people that you're with is the best way to communicate.
Julia, do you want me to move on to the next slide?
Yes, please.
Oh, yes, this is fun.
I was really happy with this article. I made these compassion cookies. It's a recipe utilizing our concepts from the class. I was inspired by this because I went on a retreat to a Tibetan temple for a weekend, and we were talking about putting positive energy into our daily lives and ways to do that. And we got these little beads that had been blessed by Dalai Lama and many other monks. And we thought about putting them in vanilla extract to make these what we called compassion cookies. So my friends and I ended up doing that, but this inspired me for the name at least. Next slide, please. And this just takes things that we had gone through in class, like how ultimately it is discussing how to create facilitative emotions in yourself, how to take your irrational thoughts and these activating events and all your self-questioning that's going on and mixing it all together and being able to walk yourself through it and have your self-talk and roll it out. I said roll it all out and place it until you can distribute all these irrational thoughts out, and sitting with it, like baking it, and letting them cool. You can facilitate these facilitative emotions and enjoy these aspects of happiness. And the facilitative emotions are ones that don't negatively impact your life, in case you don't know. But yeah, I thought that these were just some great, and I loved the recipe idea. And I think that you mentioned that we have to do a recipe for our one this semester, which I am looking forward to. I am a baker myself, so this was a close to home one, and I was really happy to be able to put this in there and that I was able to fill this out. But yeah, this was my magazine for our last class.
So as you can see, oh my gosh, I'm just sitting here listening to the students describe their projects again, and it just is so heartwarming to me just to hear how involved they got and what this really meant to them. And it truly is open pedagogy, taking the LibreText, using it as a foundation, but then the students creating something new and really something that's important, something meaningful to them. I mean, to me as an instructor, that's basically what I live for, is my students creating something new for them. And one thing I did at the end of the semester is I did a survey, a feedback survey, to find out what the students thought about the use of a LibreText specifically, since this was a new LibreText and I wanted to get that good feedback. So I'm going to go ahead and run through this. These are students' comments at the end of the semester in the class that both Josué and Julia were describing. So what the students liked, and Julia and Josué, if you want to chime in, fine. If you don't, that's fine too. But I'm going to run through this. They liked and they really appreciated the easy to read writing style. The LibreText that I use that was created but within the community college system, we're writing that specifically for students at the undergraduate level. And we wanted it to be in a language type, a writing style that would resonate with the students. So we really focused in on that. Another thing that I heard students saying, and I'll be honest, as an instructor, I absolutely love this about LibreText, are the clear, manageable sections of content. I really like it that in LibreText, the ones that I've reviewed, and I'm using LibreText in multiple classes now at multiple institutions where I teach, is that they have a chapter, but it might be broken down into maybe 3, 4, sometimes 6 different parts. It makes it easier. It's easier for students to read. It's easier to take notes on. You can go back and find information. You can reread things. I really like that. Whoops. Current timely examples and the narratives were shared by the authors. This is one of the real positive things I find about a lot of open educational resources, because things can be remixed. You can add to, again, depending upon licensing, but you can add things to it. There's a LibreText I'm using right now. It's for another, it's not at Humboldt, it's at another institution where I'm teaching, and it does need to be updated. And if I were to use it again, I definitely would bring in more up-to-date examples. Right now I'm supplementing that particular LibreText with some more up-to-date samples of things. And again, narratives. This was very important in the writing of the textbook that I'm referring to here, that the narratives, the stories of the professors themselves. I know since I've spent a lot of time overseas myself, so a lot of my examples in nonverbal and also in communication climate were experiences that I had as, number one, as an undergraduate student. So at 18, 19, I was living in Germany and Austria. So I brought in examples of that. That's very timely for the students who I teach. We went out of our way to make sure that we included diversity and inclusivity in all of the visuals. We looked at the images that we're going to use. We looked at the pictures we were going to use. We really thought about making this an inclusive environment within the text itself. And again, we went ahead and indicated the sources of each of those photos. We went through Creative Commons, Pixabay, Unsplash, all of these different resources there, but we also included where we found information in case people were interested in that. And the other thing, well, I do like alliteration, but I also am a real acronym type person. that having those acronyms, that students can remember these acronyms, and it kind of makes some sense. It's a way to formulate things. And I noted in some of the magazine articles that students themselves were beginning to use acronyms as a way to share out information as well. So these are some of the comments that were coming from the students at the end of the semester when this was used in the interpersonal communication course. Now, my students and I got together and we decided, well, we were going to do a presentation for you, but we thought we'd ask you some questions. So we're going to open this up, and I don't know if Julia or Josué, if one of you would be kind of a person to watch the chat, if you're able to see the chat. If anybody wants to share out in a response, we'd like to invite our audience members to participate. If you're not comfortable in doing so with your voice, go ahead and put it in the chat, because at the end, I'm hoping to have at least a few minutes to look at the chat and get some of your questions. But the first question here, Julia, I'm actually going to have you ask this question because you're the one who came up with this one.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, as a professor, why not use an open educational resource? Because I know as a student, I always appreciate it. It's definitely something that I feel more inclined to participate in the class when the material that we're accessing is readily available and I feel more connected with it. So I'm always wondering why other professors don't use OER resources.
And if anybody has a response, or if you're mulling it over and want to put something in the chat, that would be great. Because this was an authentic question Julia asked, and I thought, wow, great question. Ask the professor why they aren't using an OER. And I think there was one other thing you shared with me the other day, Julia, that I hadn't even thought about this, but the fact that I was one of the co-authors of some of the chapters, that made a difference for you as well.
Oh yeah, being one of the co-authors and knowing that you've written this book made me more inclined to ask questions, and I felt and I trusted that you had a little bit more information than what was being provided in the textbook. So if I had questions or needed clarification, I knew that you would be able to clarify that for me, opposed to maybe not reading the textbook after a while or having skimmed through it. You knew the content, you knew the material, and I could see that and I felt that while being taught by you as a professor.
Yeah, and I think for those of you who are into remixing or adding information into your classes based on an OER, I think that's a valuable lesson that I just learned from Julia, that if you put your own voice into what you're teaching, that gives you more credibility. Students feel comfortable because they have an idea that you may know more of what you're talking about. And so I think that's really important to know, and I really appreciate you sharing that. Okay, let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and just ask a few more questions. I am a speech teacher, and so I'm watching time. We always do. I'm so time oriented. I tell my students that all the time. So another question, again, just to think about, and if you're comfortable, go ahead and put something in the chat. But how would you describe your own experiences using OER? So this would go for the librarians. This would go for the faculty. If we have other students here, what are your experiences using OER? How do students react to your use of OER? So this is kind of a generic open question for you. Another question, not have they, but how have your students connected their own observations and life experiences to course content? Again, as a believer in open pedagogy, that idea that our learners are really the teachers, how do they themselves connect up with the content in a course? So how are they applying? What are they finding important to them? And I think those choices that they can make in what they are learning, that's important. That's that sense of ownership that's there. So I'm going to go ahead. I've got one more slide of questions, and then Josué, I don't know if anybody's putting anything in the chat, but I'll call on you in a second. So here's a few more questions for you. Now, as somebody who's writing ancillaries, and ancillaries would be like the test questions, discussion questions, the activities like the magazine type of idea. If you are an instructor or an administrator or anybody interested in the creation of and use of an OER, what types of ancillaries would you like to see available? As somebody who's taught for a gazillion years, I'm really interested in helping newer faculty who might get a book, get an OER, and think, what do I do with it now? I'll be honest, even though I'm an old timer when it comes to teaching, that one of the OERs that I picked for my mass communication course, I'm teaching at another institution. When I saw the homework tab, I immediately went for that book. Now, I've taught mass media and contemporary society since the early 1980s, but in trying to find an OER for it, I looked through a number of different LibreTexts and different sources. But when I saw the homework tab on LibreTexts, I went to it. So I'm actually developing ancillaries for that, which I hope to share at the end of the semester with LibreTexts as some potential ancillaries that could be used with that textbook. But it's helpful for new instructors. It's a beginning point for new instructors. So what types of ancillaries would you like to see? And then how important are they? For me, I'll be really honest. If I see ancillaries, I may or may not choose to use them, but if they're there, I look at them. And it may make me go over to choosing a particular open educational resource. Like I said, the one LibreText I'm using right now, I'm using some of the ancillaries as starting points for discussions, but I am creating more ancillaries to go along with it. But that did make a difference for me, at least. And then I have one more question just to throw out there. It's the whole idea of open educational resources. I think Julia brought up this and Josué as well. The whole idea of accessibility. How accessible are the resources? And I think this is something that's so important that we think about. So these were just some questions we wanted to offer to you. And I am paying attention to time out of respect for everybody's time here. But Josué, are there a number of different things in the chat that we might have time to address a little bit?
There are a few things. I see a comment from Cyril saying, I love OERs. I wish they had more interactive features. That said, I really value open pedagogy and co-creating projects with students. Evolving OERs with students is an awesome method. Kudos all. Structuring the process with groups and chapters helps the process.
Definitely, definitely.
I have one response to Julia's question. If equality OER exists, I have no answer. Huh. I have one from.
I didn't catch it.
If equality OER exists, I have no answer. So I'm assuming it's yeah. If a great OER exists, I can't imagine why someone wouldn't be using one.
And let me jump in just for a second, Josué. This is where I think we as instructors can add to the world out there, and actually our students. I really want my students to be authors. I can see where if there are some OERs, and I've run across them where I thought, oh, I wish they had more up-to-date information, or I wish they would go more into this. We can remix, we can add to things, again, depending upon licensing reasons. So there, I mean, that's our opportunity to share out what we'd like our students to know and to make OERs quality and for the audience that we're teaching to. I teach at 3 different institutions right now, even though I'm supposedly retired. I teach at Cal Poly Humboldt, which is part of the Cal State system. I'm teaching a couple of classes for College of the Redwoods. One is an online course at College of the Redwoods. The other one is at Pelican Bay State Prison. I'm doing interpersonal communication. They're using that textbook you folks used semester. They're using the textbook I helped co-author. And what's really cool, quick story. One of my inmates noted that I was one of the authors, and he was so thrilled when he wrote back his letter to Dr. Reitzel that I was one of the authors of it. So it does go along with what Julia is saying. And I'm also teaching for a correctional education program through another university back east, which is fully online. So I have different populations. I have to treat those populations a little bit differently because of that. That's where the beauty of OERs can come into. You can tailor make them for the audience that you are teaching. And how about one more comment, because I want to wrap up on time for everybody.
Oh, well, this one is there are several comments here, and I think that they're actually pretty interesting. But this one is an interesting I guess situation. Unfortunately, this is from Emmanuel Pasquale. Unfortunately, we are assigned the textbook we are to use in the course.
Let me ask Emmanuel, I don't know if you could answer this, but are you able to supplement what you teach. And maybe if you just want to put it in the chat, maybe think about something supplemental.
Yes, I can always supplement, but the time is I guess the time is I don't have enough time in the class itself to teach everything.
Right.
But yeah, I could supplement.
Yeah, and that's one of those really hard questions. Because I'm always, I've been teaching so long, but I have to pick and choose. How much can I I take it from how much can I inspire my students? Because I mean, I have and I'm sure you do too, all this information, the required text, lots of content. I think it's more important to get the excitement. For me, it's getting students excited. If I don't get them excited, I mean, the content's
Well,
there.
actually,
I can't get it across. Go ahead.
oh, sorry. Actually, when you mentioned that, what I do, I guess it kind of speaks to what you're saying is I do revise. There's a presentation that I do change that around, and then I don't read off of the presentation. I, include my experience because I teach at a community college, so usually these students are not in a business environment yet, so I bring it to their environment. Like I talk about cars and houses as opposed to like, equipment at a business. So it's something that they can understand. So I do
Right.
supplement it, and I try to use humor as well. To keep them keep them awake because what I teach is not really exciting. But yeah, so I do
Good.
yeah. But
So I like
unfortunately, yeah. Oh, go
I like
ahead.
what
Sorry.
Sorry, I get so excited listening to what you're saying here because it's the narrative. Telling your story can help inspire students. And that whole use of humor. Sometimes, again, textbooks, the traditional textbook can be so heavy duty with content. But I find that if you don't engage the students, they're just not going to engage with the material. It sounds like you're taking steps to do that, which is so positive, so positive. That's great. So I don't know. I'm watching time here. I would love to stay after this is officially. Jennifer or Delmar, is there a session after this one?
No, you can stick around if you like.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end it, but after I end it officially, let's go ahead and, well, I'll stay on. I'm excited about talking. I don't know, my students may have other classes to go. Well, actually, you're skipping my class. We're supposed to still be in class. I know you're free. So we'll stay on afterwards, but out of respect, I want to go ahead and end on time. So if you want to stay after and chat a little bit, I'm more than happy to. But let me go ahead and wrap up things for everyone. So I just wanted to say thank you for attending our session this afternoon. Julia, Josué, and I can speak for myself. I've noted their nonverbal communication. I teach a 4-unit class on nonverbal, so I've been observing them. They seem to have been excited about sharing their stories as well. But I wanted to thank all of you for coming to the special LibreTexts edition of the magazine cover story. And if you have any suggestions, questions, feedback, anything at all, I'm going to leave this slide up here for a moment. I'm more than happy to send you information directly. I can send you the PowerPoint. I could send you some other information that I've got as well if you've got questions, not even just today, but in the future. I will be teaching at Humboldt one more year. So I'm going to be around. I think Delmar and Jennifer, even if they try to get rid of me, I'm such a staunch supporter of LibreTexts. They're stuck with me for a while, at least another year. But I am more than happy to give feedback, read things. I'm a great reviewer and I can give you some feedback on things. So please feel free to reach out and contact me if you have any questions whatsoever. And the very, very last slide, and I'm not going to show it to you right now, is you've got to find 2 minutes of time sometime to watch this video. It's only about 1:41 seconds or so, but it's a great little video, 7 things that happen when students own their learning. And with that, I'm going to stop share. And thank each and every one of you for coming and for participating. I really appreciate it. Give yourselves a round of applause, everybody in the audience.
We want to thank you and your students. That was wonderful. Thank you. And we're never going to want to get rid of you. So don't even try to go hide in the woods. We will find you.
Oh, I know. Well, there's a lot of redwoods up here.
Doesn't matter. We'll find you. We will find you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm forewarned.
Yes, exactly. Delmar, I think you have to stop the recording. I think you're still host.